The needle slipped through worn fabric as Nora Vaughn squinted in the flickering candlelight, her fingers working by memory more than sight, when suddenly a gunshot cracked through the night and shattered every bit of peace her small room had offered. She dropped the shirt she had been mending, her heart hammering against her ribs as voices erupted outside her window. Nome, Alaska Territory, was supposed to be quieter than this, even in 1899. The gold rush had brought its share of trouble, but most men knew better than to fire weapons in the residential quarter after dark. Nora pressed herself against the wall beside her window, listening as boots pounded past on the dirt street below. Her candle guttered in the draft from the poorly sealed window frame, and she wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "Stop that man!" Someone shouted, and more footsteps followed. Nora waited, counting her breaths the way her mother had taught her when she was frightened as a child. 1, 2, 3. By the time she reached 30, the street had gone silent again. She returned to her chair, picked up the shirt, and resumed her work. The tear in the sleeve was extensive, probably from a nail or piece of rough wood, and the owner needed it by morning. She had promised, and Nora Vaughn kept her promises. The candle burned lower as she worked, casting dancing shadows across the small room that served as both her living quarters and her workshop. Bolts of fabric lined one wall, and a dress form stood in the corner wearing a half-finished gown that Mrs. Henderson had commissioned for the summer social. Nora's fingers moved with practiced efficiency, each stitch small and even, invisible once the mending was complete. This was her gift, her livelihood, the skill that had kept her fed and housed since her father died 3 years ago. She was 22 years old, and she had been alone for so long that sometimes she forgot what it felt like to have someone waiting for her at the end of the day. Her father had been a tailor, one of the finest in San Francisco, and he had taught her everything he knew before consumption took him. Nora had fled to Alaska Territory, partly for the opportunities the gold rush provided, and partly to escape the memories that haunted every street corner of the city where she had grown up. The candle sputtered, nearly out, and Nora set aside the mended shirt with a sigh. She would need to buy more candles tomorrow, which meant less money for fabric, which meant fewer dresses she could make on speculation to sell in the shop window. Everything was always a calculation, a careful balance between what she needed and what she could afford. She had just stood to prepare for bed when someone knocked on her door. Nora froze. It was well past 10 o'clock, far too late for any respectable caller. She glanced at the window, wondering if she should simply pretend to be asleep, but the knock came again, more insistent this time. "Please," a man's voice called through the door, rough with pain. "I need help." Against her better judgment, Nora moved to the door but kept the chain latched as she opened it a crack. A man stood in the hallway, one hand pressed against his side, his face pale in the dim light from the single lamp that burned at the end of the corridor. Blood seeped between his fingers, dark against his shirt. "I'm sorry to disturb you," he said, his voice steadier than she would have expected from someone losing that much blood. "The doctor's gone to a mining camp up the creek, won't be back until morning. Someone said there was a seamstress here who was good with a needle." "I mend clothes, not people," Nora said, but even as she spoke, she was unlatching the chain. Her mother had been a nurse before she married, and Nora had inherited enough knowledge to be dangerous. She could not turn away someone who needed help, even a stranger who might bring trouble to her door. The man stumbled as he crossed the threshold, and Nora caught his arm, surprised by the solid muscle beneath his shirt. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes that were probably blue but looked black in the candlelight. His face was weathered in a way that spoke of years spent outdoors, and his hands were calloused and strong. "Sit," she commanded, gesturing to her work chair. "Let me see." He lowered himself carefully into the chair, and Nora lit 2 more candles despite the waste. She needed light for this. When she pulled his hand away from his side, she saw that his shirt was soaked with blood. But the wound itself, once she had cut the fabric away, was not as bad as she had feared. A bullet had grazed his ribs, tearing a furrow through skin and muscle but missing anything vital. "You're lucky," she said, reaching for her sewing basket. "It's barely more than a deep cut." "Doesn't feel lucky," the man said, but there was a hint of humor in his voice. "I'm Quinn Hart, by the way. Since you're about to stitch me back together, seemed like you should know my name." "Nora Vaughn." She threaded a needle with silk thread, the finest she had. It would hurt less going through his skin than cotton, and it was less likely to cause infection. "This is going to hurt," I figured. Quinn gripped the arms of the chair, his knuckles white. "That shooting outside earlier, that was meant for me. I didn't fire back." "Why not?" Nora cleaned the wound with whiskey from the bottle she kept for medicinal purposes, and Quinn hissed through his teeth. "Because I'm not a killer." He took a deep breath, let it out slowly. "I'm a ranch hand, just came into town to collect my wages and buy supplies. Someone I used to know saw me, decided we had unfinished business. I disagreed." Nora made the first stitch, and Quinn's entire body went rigid, but he did not cry out. She worked as quickly as she could, her fingers steady despite the unusual canvas. His skin was warm beneath her hands, and she could feel his pulse, fast but strong. He had the build of a man who worked hard for his living, all lean muscle and no softness. "You're good at this," Quinn said after a few minutes, his voice tight with pain. "My mother was a nurse. She taught me." Nora did not mention that her mother had died when Nora was 16, worn out by poverty and grief after her father lost his business to a dishonest partner. Some stories were too heavy to share with strangers. Lucky for me. Quinn watched her work, his gaze steady despite the pain he must be feeling. Not many women would let a bleeding stranger into their home in the middle of the night. Not many men would stand in a hallway bleeding to death rather than bang down the door. Nora finished the last stitch and tied off the thread. "There. You'll need to keep it clean and change the bandage every day. I'll give you some cloth." She wrapped his ribs with strips of clean linen, her hands moving with professional efficiency. Quinn's skin was hot under her fingers, but she told herself it was from the exertion and pain, nothing more. When she was finished, she stepped back and surveyed her work. The bandage was neat and tight, and the bleeding had stopped. "Thank you," Quinn said, standing slowly. He swayed slightly, and Nora grabbed his arm to steady him. "How much do I owe you?" "Nothing." The word was out before she could think better of it. "Just be more careful who you turn your back on." Quinn reached into his pocket with his good hand and pulled out $2 silver. He set them on her work table despite her protest. For the supplies, at least, and the late hour. Before Nora could argue, he was gone, moving carefully down the hallway and out into the night. She stood in her doorway, watching until he disappeared around the corner, then closed and latched the door. The candles had burned down to stubs and she was exhausted, but she knew she would not sleep. Her hands still remembered the warmth of Quinn Hart's skin, and her mind kept returning to the steadiness in his voice despite the pain he had been in. She cleaned up the blood and scraps of fabric, then finally blew out the candles and crawled into bed. But sleep was a long time coming, and when it did, she dreamed of blue eyes and calloused hands. Morning came too soon, bringing weak sunlight through her window and the sounds of Nome waking up. Nora dressed quickly and ate a breakfast of bread and tea before settling down to finish the shirt she had been mending when Quinn knocked on her door. Her fingers felt clumsy after the interrupted sleep, but she forced herself to focus. The work had to be perfect, or she would not be paid, and she could not afford to lose customers. The shirt's owner arrived at 9 o'clock sharp, inspected her work with a critical eye, and paid her without comment. Nora added the coins to the small leather pouch where she kept her earnings, and tried not to calculate how many more weeks of this careful economy stretched ahead of her. She had enough to last through the winter if she was careful, enough to buy supplies and pay her rent, but nothing extra, no room for mistakes or unexpected expenses. She was measuring fabric for a new dress when someone knocked on her door again. Nora's heart jumped before she could control it, hoping and fearing in equal measure that it might be Quinn returning. But when she opened the door, she found a boy of perhaps 12 standing in the hallway, his cap clutched in his hands. "Miss Vaughn, Mr. Hart sent me. He said to give you this." The boy held out a package wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. Nora took it, feeling the softness of fabric beneath her fingers. "Thank you." The boy tipped his cap and darted away before she could ask any questions. Nora closed the door and untied the string with fingers that trembled slightly. Inside the paper, she found a bolt of fine wool in a deep blue that reminded her of the ocean at dusk, and tucked among the folds was a note written in a strong, clear hand. "For the bandages and the kindness. Thank you again, Quinn Hart." Nora ran her fingers over the wool, feeling the quality of the weave. This was expensive fabric, far more valuable than the bandages she had used. She could make a dress from this, something beautiful that would sell for good money, or she could keep it for herself, make something fine for the first time in years. She set the fabric aside and returned to her work, but her mind kept drifting back to Quinn Hart. Who was he? Where did he work? Would she see him again? The answer came 3 days later when Quinn appeared at her door in the late afternoon, his hat in his hands and his color much better than the last time she had seen him. He wore a clean shirt and vest, and his dark hair was neatly combed. "Miss Vaughn," he said, and there was a warmth in his voice that made something flutter in her chest. "I came to see if you would allow me to buy you dinner, as a proper thank you for saving my life." Nora knew she should refuse. She did not know this man, had only met him once under extraordinary circumstances, and accepting his invitation would mean stepping outside the careful boundaries she had built around her life. But something in Quinn's eyes, a genuine kindness mixed with hope, made her hesitate. "I don't know," she said slowly. "It wouldn't be proper." "We could eat at the hotel dining room," Quinn suggested. "Public, respectable, and I promise I'm not the sort of man who usually gets shot at. That was a one-time occurrence." Despite herself, Nora smiled. "That's reassuring." "So is that a yes? That's a maybe." She glanced back at the dress she had been working on, calculating how much more she needed to accomplish before dark. "I need to finish this first. I can wait." Quinn gestured to the hallway. "I'll be downstairs. Take your time." He was gone before she could respond, and Nora stood in her doorway, caught between caution and curiosity. She had not shared a meal with a man since her father died, had not allowed herself to consider the possibility of companionship or anything more. Her life was small and carefully controlled, and that was how she had needed it to be. But Quinn Hart had knocked on her door in the middle of the night, had trusted her to help him, and had sent her fine fabric as thanks when a simple coin would have been sufficient. There was something about him that felt solid, dependable, like a foundation she had not realized she was looking for. Nora closed her door and returned to the dress, but her fingers moved faster now, driven by an anticipation she had not felt in a very long time. An hour later, she had finished enough that she could set the work aside. She changed into her best dress, a simple gray wool that she had made herself, and pinned her dark hair into a neat bun. When she looked at herself in the small mirror above her washstand, she saw a woman who was too thin, too pale, with shadows under her eyes that spoke of long nights by candlelight. But there was also a brightness in her gaze that had not been there that morning, and her cheeks had some color for the first time in months. Quinn was waiting at the bottom of the stairs, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, but he straightened when he saw her. The smile that crossed his face was worth every moment of doubt. "You look beautiful," he said simply, and Nora felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Thank you." They walked to the hotel through streets still muddy from the spring thaw, avoiding the worst of the puddles and the constant traffic of men and horses. Nome was a rough town, growing too fast for its own good, full of prospectors and merchants and people chasing dreams of gold. But Quinn moved through it all with an easy confidence, nodding to people he knew, keeping a careful eye on their surroundings. The hotel dining room was crowded and noisy, full of men eating their evening meals and discussing the day's finds. Quinn found them a table near the window, away from the worst of the noise, and held Nora's chair for her with an old-fashioned courtesy that made her heart ache slightly. Her father had been like that, careful with manners, treating everyone with respect regardless of their station. "How's the wound?" Nora asked once they had ordered their food. Quinn touched his side carefully. "Healing well, thanks to you. I took your advice and changed the bandages every day, no infection." "Good." Nora folded her hands in her lap, suddenly unsure what to say. She had spent so long alone that conversation felt like a language she had forgotten. "Tell me about yourself," Quinn said, leaning forward slightly. "How does a seamstress from California end up in Nome, Alaska territory?" Nora hesitated, but something about Quinn's open expression made her want to trust him. "My father was a tailor in San Francisco. He taught me his trade. When he died 3 years ago, I needed a fresh start. The gold rush meant opportunities here, lots of men needing their clothes mended, not enough people to do the work. It must have been hard, coming here alone." Quinn's voice was gentle, no pity in it, just understanding. "Yes." Nora did not elaborate and Quinn did not press. Their food arrived, and they ate while Quinn told her about his work. He was a ranch hand on a cattle operation about 20 miles outside of Nome, working for a man named Samuel Porter, who was trying to establish a beef supply for the town's growing population. "It was hard work," Quinn said, "but honest, and he was good at it. I grew up on a ranch in Montana," he explained. "Worked with cattle all my life. When I heard about opportunities in Alaska territory, I figured why not? I'm 25, no family left to speak of, nothing tying me down." "No family at all?" Nora asked. "My parents died when I was young, raised by my uncle, but he passed 2 years ago." Quinn's expression was matter of fact, but Nora heard the loneliness beneath the words. "What about you? Any family back in California?" "No." The word came out flat, and Nora took a sip of water to give herself time to recover. "It's just me." They finished their meal in a more comfortable silence, and when Quinn walked her back to her building, the sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. At her door, Quinn hesitated, his hat in his hands again. "Could I see you again?" he asked. "Maybe next Sunday. I have the day off." Nora knew she should be cautious, should protect herself, but the warmth in Quinn's eyes melted her resolve. "Yes," she said softly. "I'd like that." Quinn's smile was like sunrise, bright and full of promise. "Good. I'll call for you around noon." "Noon," Nora agreed. She watched him walk away, his stride long and easy despite the healing wound, and felt something shift in her chest, like a window opening after a long winter. For the first time in 3 years, she did not feel quite so alone. The days until Sunday stretched long and short at the same time. Nora worked with new energy, her fingers flying through mending and alterations, finishing Mrs. Henderson's dress 2 days early. She even started a new dress for herself from the blue wool Quinn had sent, something she had not done in over a year. Making clothing for herself felt like an indulgence, but the thought of wearing something beautiful when she saw Quinn again made her fingers move faster. On Saturday evening, as she worked by candlelight to finish the hem, someone knocked on her door. Nora set down her needle, expecting perhaps the boy with another message from Quinn, but when she opened the door, she found a woman standing in the hallway. She was perhaps 35, dressed well but not extravagantly, with sharp eyes and a knowing expression. "Miss Vaughn," the woman said, "my name is Charlotte Reed. I own the dress shop on Front Street." Nora knew the shop, had walked past it many times and admired the displays in the window. It was the finest establishment in Nome, catering to the wives of successful merchants and mine owners. "Yes, I've heard good things about your work," Charlotte said. "Mrs. Henderson showed me the dress you made for her. The stitching is excellent and the fit is perfect. I'm looking for someone to take on commissioned work, dresses and gowns that my customers order but that I don't have time to complete myself. Would you be interested?" Nora's heart began to pound. This was the opportunity she had been hoping for, a chance to move beyond simple mending and alterations to the kind of work she truly loved. "Yes, very interested." "Good." Charlotte stepped into the room, her gaze sweeping over Nora's modest workspace. "I'll provide the fabric and the designs, you do the construction. I'll pay you 50 cents for each dress completed, more for complicated gowns. Can you manage 2 or 3 pieces a week? 50 cents per dress." If Nora could complete 3 dresses a week, that would be $1.50, more than she usually made in twice the time. "Yes," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I can do that." "Excellent." Charlotte handed her a card with the shop's address. "Come by Monday morning and we'll discuss the details. I have 2 dresses I need completed by the end of the week." After Charlotte left, Nora sat in her chair and stared at the card, hardly believing her good fortune. In the space of a week, her life had shifted in ways she could not have imagined. She had met Quinn Hart, and now she had real work, the kind of work that might allow her to move beyond mere survival. She finished her blue dress by candlelight, her fingers working until they ached, and when she finally held it up, she felt a swell of pride. The dress was simple but elegant, the fabric draping beautifully, the seams invisible. It was the kind of dress she had dreamed of making when her father first taught her to sew, when the world had seemed full of possibilities. Sunday morning, Nora dressed with more care than she had in years. The blue wool felt soft against her skin, and when she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. The woman looking back at her had color in her cheeks and light in her eyes, and her hair, usually pulled back in a severe bun, was arranged in soft waves that framed her face. Quinn arrived exactly at noon, and the look on his face when he saw her was worth every late night by candlelight. "You're beautiful," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Thank you." Nora felt heat rise in her cheeks again. "You look very nice as well." Quinn wore a clean shirt and a vest, his dark hair neatly combed, and there was something different about him today, a nervousness that had not been there before. "I thought we could walk down to the beach," he said. "It's a nice day and the tide is out. There's something I'd like to show you." They walked through Nome's muddy streets toward the waterfront, passing prospectors and merchants and families going about their Sunday routines. The air was cool but not cold, carrying the salt smell of the Bering Sea and the distant sound of gulls. Quinn walked beside Nora with his hands in his pockets, close enough that their shoulders occasionally brushed, and each touch sent warmth through her body. The beach was windswept and beautiful, the water stretching away to a horizon that seemed impossibly distant. Quinn led Nora down to where the sand was firm and damp, and they walked along the waterline, their shoes leaving prints that the next wave erased. "I've been thinking about you all week," Quinn said after a few minutes of companionable silence. "I know we barely know each other, but I can't stop thinking about you." Nora's heart was beating so hard she was sure Quinn must be able to hear it. "I've been thinking about you too." Quinn stopped walking and turned to face her, his blue eyes intense. "I know this is fast. I know I should probably wait, be more proper about it. But I'm not a patient man and life's too short to waste time. I'd like to court you properly, Nora. I'd like to see where this goes between us." Nora looked at him, this man who had stumbled bleeding into her life and somehow brought light with him. She thought about her small room lit only by candlelight, the long, lonely evenings, the careful calculations that governed every decision. And then she thought about the way Quinn had looked at her in the hotel dining room, the way he had sent her that beautiful fabric, the way he was looking at her now like she was something precious. "Yes," she said softly, "I'd like that too." Quinn's smile was brilliant, and before Nora could think, he had taken her hand in his fingers warm and calloused and strong. They stood there on the beach while the waves rolled in and out, holding hands like children, and Nora felt something she had not felt in so long she had almost forgotten the name for it. She felt happy. They walked for hours that afternoon, talking about everything and nothing. Quinn told her about his childhood in Montana, about learning to ride before he could walk, about the uncle who had raised him with rough affection, and taught him everything about cattle and horses. Nora told him about her father's tailor shop in San Francisco, about the beautiful garments they had made together, about her mother's death and then her father's, and the long, dark year that had followed. "I felt like I was drowning," she admitted, surprising herself with the confession. "Everything reminded me of them, and I couldn't breathe. Coming here was supposed to be a fresh start, but I think I was just running away." "Maybe you were running towards something," Quinn suggested. "You just didn't know it yet." The thought warmed Nora more than the weak sunlight. Maybe Quinn was right. Maybe her path had been leading her here all along, to this beach, to this moment, to this man whose hand felt so right in hers. As the afternoon wore on, they turned back toward town, reluctant to let the day end. Quinn walked Nora to her building, and at the door he released her hand with obvious reluctance. "Can I see you again?" he asked. "I have to go back to the ranch tomorrow, but I'll be in town next Saturday. Maybe I could take you to dinner again." "I'd like that," Nora said. Then, surprising herself, she added, "But next time let me cook for you. Come here for dinner. It will be more private and I can show you I'm not completely helpless in the kitchen." Quinn's eyes lit up. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." "Then I'll be here at 6 o'clock next Saturday." Quinn hesitated, then leaned forward and kissed her cheek, a brief touch that left Nora's skin tingling. "Thank you for today. It was perfect." After he left, Nora climbed the stairs to her room feeling like she was floating. The space that had felt so small and dim that morning now seemed full of possibility. She lit her candles and sat down at her work table, but instead of picking up her needle, she simply sat there, her fingers touching the spot on her cheek where Quinn had kissed her. Monday morning, Nora walked to Charlotte Reed's dress shop with her head high and her blue wool dress swishing around her legs. The shop was everything she had imagined, full of fabrics and ribbons and half-finished gowns on dress forms. Charlotte greeted her warmly and showed her the 2 dresses that needed to be completed, explaining the specifications and expectations. "The quality has to be perfect," Charlotte said. "My customers pay well and they expect the best." "I understand," Nora said, running her fingers over the fine silk of one of the dresses. "When do you need them?" "Friday afternoon at the latest." Charlotte named a price that made Nora's breath catch, more than she had expected. "If these turn out well, I'll have regular work for you." Nora carried the dresses home carefully, already planning how she would construct each one. The work would be demanding, but she relished the challenge. For the first time since her father's death, she felt like she was truly using her skills, creating something beautiful rather than just patching holes. She worked late into the night, her candles burning low, but she did not mind. Her fingers flew over the fabric, each stitch precise and even, each seam perfectly aligned. The first dress took shape beneath her hands, and as she worked, she found herself humming an old song her mother used to sing. The week passed in a blur of work and anticipation. Nora completed both dresses by Thursday afternoon, and when she delivered them to Charlotte's shop on Friday morning, the older woman examined each one with a critical eye before nodding in approval. "Excellent work," Charlotte said, counting out coins into Nora's hand. "I have 3 more for you next week, if you're willing." "Absolutely," Nora said, clutching the coins. It was more money than she had earned in a month of mending and alterations. Saturday arrived feeling both too soon and not soon enough. Nora spent the morning cleaning her small room, pushing her work table against the wall to make space, covering it with a clean cloth. She had bought supplies for dinner with some of her new earnings, splurging on fresh beef and vegetables, flour for bread, and apples for a pie. Cooking in her small room was a challenge, but Nora was determined. She had a tiny stove that she rarely used, preferring to eat simple meals that did not require cooking. But today, she coaxed it to life and set about preparing a proper dinner. The beef went into a pot with onions and carrots, filling the room with a savory smell that made her stomach growl. She rolled out dough for the pie, remembering her mother's patient instructions, and soon had it baking in the oven. By the time Quinn knocked on her door at precisely 6 o'clock, Nora's hair was escaping from its pins, and her face was flushed from the heat of the stove. But the room smelled wonderful, and the table was set with her best dishes. Quinn stood in the doorway holding a bouquet of wildflowers, looking almost shy. "These are for you," he said, holding them out. "I picked them on the ride into town. They're beautiful." Nora took the flowers, their petals soft against her fingers. She had no vase, so she put them in a glass of water and set them on the windowsill where they glowed in the evening light. "Come in. Dinner's almost ready." Quinn stepped into the room and looked around, taking in the small space with its bolts of fabric and dress forms, the sewing machine in the corner, the narrow bed against one wall. Nora felt a flush of embarrassment at how modest her home was, but Quinn's expression was warm. "This is nice," he said. "Cozy. I live in a bunkhouse with 5 other men, so this looks like luxury to me." They ate at her small table, their knees almost touching in the cramped space, and Nora found herself relaxing as the evening wore on. Quinn told her stories about the ranch, about ornery cattle and wild horses, about the vast empty spaces of Alaska Territory, where a man could ride for days without seeing another soul. Nora told him about the dresses she was making for Charlotte Reed, about the satisfaction of creating something beautiful with her own hands. "You light up when you talk about your work," Quinn observed. "I can see how much you love it." "I do." Nora had never put it into words before, but it was true. "When I'm sewing, I feel close to my father, like he's there guiding my hands." After dinner, they sat on the floor by her small stove, drinking coffee and talking as the light faded outside the window. Nora had lit only 2 candles, trying to save them, but Quinn noticed and pulled a package from his coat pocket. "I brought you something," he said, looking almost embarrassed. I noticed last time I was here that you were working by candlelight. These should last longer. Inside the package were a dozen tall candles, the good kind made from beeswax that burned clean and bright. Nora felt tears prick her eyes at the thoughtfulness of the gift. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You didn't have to do that. I wanted to." Quinn reached out and took her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "I want to make things easier for you, Nora. I want to take care of you." Nora looked at him, this man she barely knew but who felt so familiar, so right. "No one's taken care of me in a long time," she admitted. "I'm not sure I remember how to let someone. Then we'll figure it out together." Quinn lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, a gesture so tender that Nora's breath caught. "I'm falling for you, Nora Vaughn. I know it's too soon. I know I should wait, but I can't help it." "You're all I think about." "I'm falling for you too," Nora whispered. "It terrifies me." "Why?" "Because I've lost everyone I've ever cared about." The words came out in a rush, years of fear and grief pouring out. "My mother, my father, everything I had. I'm scared to care about someone again, scared to lose them." Quinn moved closer, his free hand coming up to cup her cheek. "I can't promise you'll never lose me," he said quietly. "Life doesn't work that way, but I can promise that while I'm here, I'll do everything in my power to make you happy. To be worthy of your trust." Nora leaned into his touch, her eyes closing. "That's all anyone can promise." Quinn kissed her then, a soft brush of lips that sent warmth spreading through Nora's entire body. She kissed him back, tentative at first and then with more confidence, her hands coming up to rest on his shoulders. He tasted like coffee and something sweeter, and when they finally pulled apart, Nora was breathless. "I should go," Quinn said, but he made no move to leave. "It's getting late." "Stay a little longer," Nora said, surprising herself. "Please." They sat together until the candles burned low, talking and kissing and simply being together. When Quinn finally left, well past midnight, Nora felt like she was glowing from the inside out. She prepared for bed in a daze, her fingers touching her lips where Quinn had kissed her. And when she finally lay down, she fell asleep almost immediately. No nightmares for the first time in months. The summer passed in a blur of work and happiness. Quinn came to town every Saturday, and sometimes during the week if he could get away, and Nora found her world expanding in ways she had never imagined. They walked along the beach, explored the woods outside of town, and spent long evenings in her small room talking about their dreams for the future. The work from Charlotte Reed kept coming, and Nora's reputation grew. She was making more money than she ever had, enough that she could afford better fabric, more candles, even a few luxuries. But the greatest luxury was Quinn's presence in her life. The way he made her laugh, the way he held her hand, the way he looked at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. By August, they had been courting for 3 months, and Nora could not imagine her life without Quinn in it. They were sitting on the beach one evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, when Quinn turned to her with an expression so serious that Nora's heart began to race. "I love you," he said simply. "I think I've loved you since that first night when you opened your door to a bleeding stranger. I love your kindness, your strength, your talent. I love the way you hum when you work and the way you wrinkle your nose when you're concentrating. I love everything about you, Nora Vaughn." Tears spilled down Nora's cheeks, but they were happy tears. "I love you too," she said. "So much it scares me sometimes." Quinn pulled her close, and she rested her head on his shoulder, feeling safe and cherished in a way she had never thought she would feel again. They sat there as the sun dipped below the horizon, and the stars came out, one by one, like tiny candles being lit in the darkness. A week later, Quinn came to her room with a small box in his hands and nervousness written across his face. Nora knew what was in the box before he opened it, and her heart was already saying yes. "Nora Vaughn," Quinn said, dropping to one knee in her tiny room with its dress forms and bolts of fabric. "Will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life making you happy, bringing light into your days the way you've brought light into mine?" "Yes," Nora said, pulling him to his feet. "Yes, yes, yes." The ring was simple, a thin gold band with a small diamond, and it fit perfectly on Nora's finger. They kissed and laughed and cried, and when Nora finally pulled back to look at Quinn, she saw her future reflected in his eyes, bright and full of promise. They were married in early September on a crisp morning when the sky was so blue it hurt to look at. The ceremony was simple, held in the small church on Front Street with Charlotte Raid and a few other friends in attendance. Nora wore a dress she had made herself from white silk, the stitching so fine it was almost invisible, and Quinn wore a new suit that made him look handsome and slightly uncomfortable. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Quinn kissed Nora with such tenderness that she forgot there was anyone else in the room. They were married, bound together by words and promises and love, and Nora felt like she could finally breathe fully for the first time in years. Quinn had saved enough money to rent them a small house on the edge of town. Nothing fancy, but with 2 rooms and a real stove and windows that let in the light. Nora set up her sewing in one corner, and Quinn built her a proper work table, and slowly they made the space their own. Marriage to Quinn was everything Nora had dreamed of, and things she had not known to dream. He was patient with her fears, gentle when she woke from nightmares, steadfast in his love. He brought her flowers from the fields, helped her with heavy bolts of fabric, and kissed her every morning before he left for the ranch. Nora continued her work for Charlotte Raid, and by winter she had more commissions than she could handle. Women came from all over Nome to have her make their dresses, drawn by her skill and her fair prices. She hired a young woman named Sarah to help with the simpler tasks, teaching her the way her father had taught Nora, and found satisfaction in passing on her knowledge. On Christmas morning, Quinn gave Nora a gift that made her cry. It was a lamp, a proper oil lamp with a glass chimney that gave off bright, steady light, nothing like the flickering candles she had worked by for so long. "So you don't have to strain your eyes anymore," Quinn said, watching anxiously as Nora cried over the lamp. "You can work in real light now." "It's perfect," Nora said, throwing her arms around him. "You're perfect." By spring, Nora suspected she might be pregnant, and by summer there was no doubt. Quinn was over the moon with excitement, already planning how he would expand their house to make room for a nursery, talking about teaching their child to ride and rope, and all the skills his uncle had taught him. "What if it's a girl?" Nora asked, amused by his enthusiasm. "Then I'll teach her to ride and rope too," Quinn said, his hand resting gently on Nora's still flat stomach. "Our daughters will be just as capable as our sons." Their son was born in February of 1901, on a night when the northern lights danced green and purple across the sky. The labor was hard, and there were moments when Nora was sure she would not survive. But Quinn held her hand through it all, and finally, a baby's cry filled the room. "A boy," the midwife announced, placing the squalling infant in Nora's arms. "A healthy boy." They named him Thomas after Quinn's uncle, and from the moment Nora looked into her son's blue eyes, she was lost. He had Quinn's dark hair and Nora's delicate features, and he fit perfectly in the crook of her arm, like he had always belonged there. Quinn was a devoted father from the start, getting up for midnight feedings, rocking Thomas when he cried, changing diapers without complaint. He had quit his job at the ranch and found work as a foreman for a shipping company in Nome, wanting to be closer to his family. The work was steadier and paid better, and it meant he was home every night, which was all Nora wanted. Watching Quinn with Thomas, seeing the gentleness and love in his every gesture, Nora felt her heart expand in ways she had not known possible. This was her family, her life, built on the foundation of love and trust and hard work. She thought about the night Quinn had knocked on her door, bleeding and desperate, and marveled at how that one moment had changed everything. She continued her sewing work, though at a slower pace with Thomas to care for. Sarah had become skilled enough to handle most of the commissions, and Nora focused on the more complex pieces, the gowns and wedding dresses that required her expertise. Charlotte Reed had offered to make her a full partner in the dress shop, recognizing Nora's talent and business sense, and the additional income meant they were finally financially secure. When Thomas was 6 months old, Nora and Quinn took him to the beach where they had walked on their first Sunday together. It was a warm August afternoon, and they spread a blanket on the sand and let Thomas explore, his small hands grabbing at shells and pebbles. "Do you remember the first time we came here?" Quinn asked, his arm around Nora's shoulders. "I was so nervous I could barely speak." "You were very sweet," Nora said, leaning into him. "I knew even then that I was in trouble. Good trouble, the best trouble." Nora kissed him, tasting salt from the sea air. "I never imagined I could be this happy. For so long I was just surviving, working by candlelight, patching holes, and then you came into my life and brought the sun with you." Quinn smiled, that brilliant smile that still made Nora's heart skip. "You brought the sun, Nora. You just couldn't see it yet." They sat on the beach as the afternoon wore on, watching Thomas discover the world, and Nora felt a peace she had not known she was capable of feeling. The pain of losing her parents would always be part of her, but it no longer defined her. She had built a new life, a good life, full of love and purpose and possibility. 2 years later, their daughter was born, a tiny, perfect thing they named Grace. Thomas, now a sturdy toddler, was fascinated by his baby sister, always wanting to hold her and help take care of her. Quinn joked that they were building their own ranch hands, and Nora laughed, knowing that whatever their children chose to do, they would support them. The years passed in a rhythm of work and family, seasons turning from summer to winter and back again. Quinn's steady presence was the anchor of Nora's life, and she was his. They had their struggles, of course. There were lean months when work was scarce, illnesses that frightened them, the occasional argument that flared hot and was resolved with tears and apologies. But through it all, their love remained constant, a bright flame that no hardship could extinguish. When Thomas was 5 and Grace was 3, Quinn came home one evening with news that made Nora's heart race. Samuel Porter, his old employer, was selling his ranch and moving south. Quinn had been offered the chance to buy it, a crazy opportunity that would mean leaving Nome and striking out on their own. "It's a risk," Quinn said, watching Nora's face anxiously. "We'd have to take out a loan, and it would be hard work, harder than anything we've done before. But it's good land, Nora, with water rights and grazing for 500 head of cattle. We could build something real there, something to pass down to Thomas and Grace." Nora thought about her dress shop, about Charlotte Reed and Sarah, and all the customers she had built relationships with over the years. Leaving Nome would mean leaving behind everything she had worked so hard to create. But it would also mean a new adventure, a chance to build something alongside Quinn, to give their children room to grow and explore. "Yes," she said finally, "let's do it." The move was harder than either of them anticipated. They sold their house in Nome and most of their possessions, keeping only what they could fit in a wagon. Nora brought her sewing machine, her precious lamp, and her most important tools. Everything else they left behind, trusting that they could build anew. The ranch was 20 miles outside Nome, at the edge of the wilderness, with a small house that needed work and outbuildings that had seen better days. But the land was beautiful, rolling hills dotted with wildflowers, stands of spruce and birch, and a clear stream that ran year-round. They worked from dawn until dusk that first year, repairing buildings, mending fences, buying cattle, and learning how to manage them. Quinn was in his element, doing the work he had been born to do, and watching him thrive made Nora's own struggles worthwhile. She missed her sewing work, missed the creative satisfaction of making beautiful gowns, but she found new satisfaction in keeping house, raising their children, helping Quinn with the ranch accounts and planning. Thomas and Grace grew like weeds, healthy and happy and wild in a way that would never have been possible in town. Thomas learned to ride almost before he could walk, and Grace was not far behind. They helped with the ranch work as much as their small hands were able, collecting eggs, feeding the chickens, fetching tools for their father. In the evenings, when the work was done and the children were asleep, Quinn and Nora would sit on the porch of their small house and watch the sun set over the mountains. Sometimes they talked, and sometimes they simply sat in comfortable silence, Quinn's arm around Nora's shoulders, her head resting against his chest. "Are you happy?" Quinn asked one night after they had been at the ranch for a year. Nora considered the question, thinking about everything they had given up to be here and everything they had gained. "Yes," she said honestly. "I miss my sewing sometimes, miss creating beautiful things. But this life we're building, it's beautiful too, and I get to build it with you." Quinn kissed the top of her head. "I love you, Nora Hart. I love you too." By their 5th year on the ranch, they had tripled their herd and built a new barn. Quinn had hired 2 ranch hands to help with the work, young men from Nome looking for honest labor, and the operation was finally turning a real profit. Nora had set up a sewing room in one corner of the house and was taking on occasional commissions from women in the area. Nothing as demanding as her work in Nome, but enough to satisfy her creative urges. Thomas was now 10, tall and lean like his father, with a gift for working with animals that made Quinn's chest swell with pride. Grace was 8, a whirlwind of energy and curiosity, constantly asking questions and pushing boundaries. They were good children, well-behaved but spirited, and Nora and Quinn raised them with love and firm boundaries. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Quinn took Nora back to Nome for a weekend, leaving the children with one of the ranch hands and his wife. They walked along the beach where they had first fallen in love, and Quinn held Nora's hand the way he had that first Sunday. 10 years, Quinn said wonderingly. "It feels like yesterday and a lifetime ago all at once." "I know." Nora squeezed his hand. "Do you remember what you said that day? That you were falling for me. I remember being terrified you'd laugh at me." Quinn smiled at the memory. "I'd never felt that way about anyone before. I didn't know what to do with it. I'm glad you didn't give up." Nora stopped walking and turned to face him. "I'm glad you kept coming back, kept pushing past my fear. You saved me, Quinn. I was drowning in grief and loneliness and you pulled me out." "We saved each other," Quinn said, cupping her face in his hands. "You gave me a home, a family, a reason to work harder and dream bigger. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Nora Hart." They kissed there on the beach, the same beach where they had shared their first kiss, and Nora felt the same flutter of excitement she had felt 10 years ago. Time had not diminished their love, only deepened it, seasoning it with shared experiences and weathered storms. That night, in a hotel room in Nome, Quinn made love to Nora with the same tenderness and passion he had shown on their wedding night, and afterward, they lay tangled together, talking about their dreams for the future. They wanted more children, Quinn said, maybe 2 or 3 more if they were blessed. They wanted to expand the ranch, build a larger house, maybe start breeding horses in addition to cattle. "What do you want?" Quinn asked. "Really want just for yourself?" Nora thought about it. "I want to teach Grace to sew," she said finally. "The way my father taught me, I want to pass that on, keep that connection alive." "Then you should," Quinn said simply. "Whatever you want, Nora, I'll make sure you get it." Their 11th year brought challenges. A harsh winter killed off part of their herd, and they lost money they could not afford to lose. One of their ranch hands quit without notice, leaving them short-handed during calving season. Thomas broke his arm falling from a horse, and Grace came down with pneumonia that had Nora sitting up with her for 3 terrifying nights. But they weathered it all together, Quinn and Nora standing side by side, refusing to give up. They worked harder, slept less, and somehow made it through. When spring finally came, bringing warm weather and new grass, they stood on their porch and looked out at the ranch they had built, at the cattle grazing in the pastures, at their children playing in the yard, and felt a bone-deep satisfaction. "We did it," Quinn said, pulling Nora close. "We survived." "We did more than survive," Nora said. "We thrived." As the years continued to pass, the ranch grew and prospered. Thomas became Quinn's right-hand man, taking on more responsibility, and Grace showed an aptitude for the business side of things, keeping accounts with the same precision Nora had once applied to her stitching. They added 3 more children to their family over the years, 2 boys and a girl, and the house they built was always full of noise and laughter and life. Nora never stopped sewing. She set up a proper workshop in one of the outbuildings, and women from all over the territory came to her for dresses and gowns. She taught Grace and her youngest daughter, and sometimes in the evenings, all 3 of them would sit together, needles flashing in the lamplight, creating beautiful things with their hands. Quinn remained her anchor, her partner, her love. He aged well, his dark hair going silver at the temples, his face becoming more weathered but no less handsome to Nora's eyes. They still walked together in the evenings, still sat on the porch watching the sunset, still talked about their dreams and hopes and fears. On their 20th anniversary, their children threw them a party inviting friends and neighbors from all over the territory. There was food and music and dancing, and Quinn waltzed Nora around the barn floor with the same grace he had shown the first time they danced. "Happy?" he asked, the same question he had been asking for 20 years. "Happy," Nora confirmed, resting her head on his shoulder. "So very happy." She thought about the girl she had been, working by candlelight in a tiny room, patching holes and trying not to think about the loneliness that threatened to swallow her whole. That girl had been so afraid, so convinced that she was meant to be alone. But she had been wrong. She had just been waiting for the right person to knock on her door, to bring light into her darkness, to show her that life could be full and rich and beautiful. Quinn Hart had been that person. He had stumbled into her life bleeding and desperate, and somehow he had saved her. Or maybe they had saved each other. It did not really matter. What mattered was that they had found each other, that they had built a life together, that their love had grown and deepened with every passing year. As Nora grew older, she spent more time in her sewing workshop, creating heirloom pieces for her grandchildren, teaching any child or grandchild who showed interest in the craft. Her fingers were not as nimble as they once had been, her eyes not as sharp despite the good lamp Quinn had given her so many years ago, but her skill remained, honed by decades of practice. Quinn retired from the heavy ranch work, leaving most of it to Thomas and the younger children, but he never stopped working entirely. He built furniture in his workshop, crafting rocking chairs and cradles and tables with the same care Nora applied to her sewing. They worked side by side in their respective workshops, companions in creativity as they had been companions in life. On their 30th anniversary, Quinn gave Nora a gift that made her weep. It was a quilt, made from scraps of fabric from every significant dress she had ever sewn. Her wedding dress, the dresses she had made for each of their children's christenings, Grace's wedding gown, the blue wool dress she had worn on their first official outing. Quinn had collected the scraps over the years, saving them, and then had secretly commissioned a quilter to piece them together. "So you can wrap yourself in memories," Quinn said, watching Nora cry over the beautiful quilt. "All the beautiful things you've created, all the love you've stitched into fabric." "It's perfect," Nora said, her voice breaking. "You're perfect." They sat together under the quilt that evening, on the porch of the house they had built, watching the sun set over the ranch they had created through hard work and determination and love. Their grandchildren played in the yard, and the sound of their laughter drifted up to the porch, sweet and clear. "Do you ever think about that night?" Quinn asked. "The night I knocked on your door all the time," Nora admitted. "I think about how close I came to not answering, how I almost let fear keep me from opening that door. I'm glad you were brave." "I'm glad you were bleeding," Nora said, and they both laughed at the absurdity of it. "I mean, I'm not glad you were hurt, but I'm glad it brought you to my door." "God works in mysterious ways," Quinn said, pulling her closer. "Or fate, or luck, or whatever you want to call it. All I know is that I was meant to find you, Nora. You were meant to open that door. Everything that came after, that was meant to happen too." Nora rested her head on Quinn's shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her cheek. They sat there as the stars came out, one by one, like tiny candles being lit in the darkness, and Nora thought about how fitting that image was. Her life before Quinn had been darkness, illuminated only by the small, flickering light of her candles, just enough to see the work in front of her but never enough to light up the world. And then Quinn had come into her life, and suddenly there was sun, bright and warm and life-giving. He had shown her that she did not have to live in darkness, that there was light and love and happiness waiting for her if she was brave enough to reach for it. They had built a beautiful life together, full of children and grandchildren, work and creativity, challenges overcome and dreams achieved. It had not always been easy, but it had always been worthwhile. Every stitch Nora had ever sewn, every hole she had patched, every beautiful garment she had created, they were all part of the tapestry of her life, woven together with love and hope, and the kind of joy that comes from being truly seen and valued. As Nora sat there under her memory quilt, surrounded by the sounds of her family and the warmth of Quinn's embrace, she felt a completeness that had nothing to do with work accomplished or money earned. It was the completeness of a life well lived, of love given and received, of a partnership that had weathered every storm and emerged stronger for it. "I love you," she whispered to Quinn, the words as true now as they had been when she first spoke them all those years ago on the beach. "I love you too," Quinn said, kissing the top of her head. "Today, tomorrow, and all the days after that." The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink and purple, and Nora closed her eyes, content. She had spent so many years working by candlelight, patching holes, just trying to survive. But Quinn had brought the sun into her life, and in doing so, he had helped her learn to truly live. And what a life it had been. What a beautiful, full, rich life, stitched together with love and held fast by the strength of two hearts beating as one. The seamstress and the cowboy, bound together by fate and choice, and the kind of love that transforms everything it touches. As the stars brightened overhead and the night sounds of the ranch settled around them, Quinn and Nora sat together in perfect peace. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built something lasting and true. The candles of Nora's old life had long since burned out, but the sun Quinn brought into her world still shone as brightly as ever, warming them both, lighting their way forward into whatever years remained. It was not the ending of their story, not really. There would be more years, more grandchildren, more joys and sorrows and ordinary moments that make up a life. But in that perfect moment, sitting on their porch under a quilt made of memories, Nora knew that whatever came next, they would face it together, hand in hand, hearts intertwined, just as they had always done. The seamstress had spent years patching holes by candlelight, never imagining that one night a bleeding cowboy would knock on her door and change everything. But he had, and she had opened that door despite her fear, and in doing so, she had opened herself to a life more beautiful than anything she could have imagined. That was the magic of love, Nora thought. It did not erase the past or fix everything that was broken, but it brought light into the darkness, warmth into the cold, hope into despair. It transformed two lonely people into a family, two separate lives into one shared journey, and what a journey it had been.